All right. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I come at this from an interesting perspective. I am an American who has been helping Western companies, mostly in Europe, expand to Asia. And so, as Antonio mentioned, I work with a lot of different cultures, have so much fun traveling the world. I really missed that travel. I took about a year off during the pandemic, and then it kind of started all up again. Are there any other Americans in the audience? Oh, one. Okay, I'll go easy then on the American jokes. But I like to get to know my audiences a little bit, and I like to do so by numbers. And so I'm going to start with 5 really numbers: 27, 2, 56, and 61, and this god-awful almost 5 million. And so, first of all, I have been 27 years in the games industry. I started at SEGA back in 1995. I've worked at Activision, done consulting for a number of different companies. What I am probably most well known for is that I launched, back in 2010, I was about employee number 60 at Unity, their first asset in Asia, and grew the Asia business from what co-founder David Helgeson called a rounding error on a spreadsheet to 45% of the company's global revenue, and just had a fantastic time doing it. Since leaving Unity in 2015, I've been doing a lot of different consulting through my consulting company, Venture Tech Partners. And as of December 1st, I will be joining i3D.net full-time. And really looking forward to that as VP of Growth, heading most of their growth initiatives, focusing primarily on the Americas and Asia, but working with a really great global team. And so since I start with them December 1st, my number one goal at this talk is to not say anything that would get me fired before I start. So that's going to be my focus. So yeah, 27 years in the industry, seen a lot of really fascinating things. The number 2, oh, by the way, before we move on from that, how many of you have been in the games industry more than 5 years? Raise your hand. Okay. Anybody more than 10? All right. Anybody more than 15? Oh, there's one. 20? How many? 30. I'm just a baby in the industry then. Yeah, come on up. And so I speak 2 languages, Japanese and English, a little bit of English. One of the things I love about coming to this region are all the polyglots that I meet. How many of you speak at least 3 languages? Okay. Anybody speak 5 or more? Nice. How many, sir? How many languages do you speak? 3. Okay, sorry. All right. So now, one of my favorite jokes is that if you speak 3 languages, they call you trilingual. If you speak 2 languages, they call you bilingual. What do they call you if you only speak 1 language and that one not very well? American, exactly. And actually, if you were to look on my LinkedIn profile, you'll find that I actually list 4 languages in my profile. That in addition to Japanese and English, I also speak teenager and sarcasm because I am a father. Arguably, those languages are pretty close, so maybe it's only 3. This next number, I am 56 years old, and I have been to 61 countries. Traveled quite a bit, love just studying various cultures and languages, although I don't speak a lot of them. 8 of these countries, by the way, I have done VC or private equity deals with firms in those countries. Israel's not one of them. So if there are any Israeli investors, local investors here in the audience, I know of some really great potential targets for you. This next number, on 3 airline networks alone, I've got almost 9.5 million miles. When I fly home Friday night from Tel Aviv, I'm going to top 1 million on United and Star Alliance. But you mix in all the others, and I have flown more than 10 million miles lifetime to date. So I've been around just a little bit. Now, in my time in the industry, I've witnessed a lot of transitions. I actually started when arcades were really strong. I witnessed the very ugly transition from premium to free-to-play. I'm now witnessing free-to-play to play and to earn. By the way, I'm bullish despite all of the crazy stuff happening just in the last couple of weeks. But what's common with all of these transitions? I would argue that what's common in here is that none of these old things ever went away. You can still play in arcades, not as much, but really, these are just additive ways in which we can entertain ourselves and our customers and whatnot. In fact, Mark Merrill, the CEO of Riot Games, said what tends to really happen is new innovations or new platforms oftentimes expand the growth rather than cannibalize other growth. And I definitely have found that to be true during my entire career. So let's talk a little bit about trends. The first trend I want to talk about briefly is we're in a pandemic hangover. Newzoo predicts that we'll actually see a decline in games industry revenue in 2023. And there's a lot of concern expressed that kids aren't on Roblox as much anymore. My bigger concern is kids haven't been to school for 2 years. So in a way, this isn't necessarily a bad thing societally, but there certainly does create a challenge. Despite being in a hangover, there's still lots of money in this space. Investors are very active. They've got a lot of dry powder to invest in companies. You see a lot of consolidation. You see Web3 games and cloud games. These are all trends that are really important. I want to talk a little bit about AI and where I think AI is going. And I'm going to mention this now because I have a bold prediction to make at the end of this presentation. But there's a fantastic book that I'm reading, I'm not quite done with it yet, called AI 2041. And it's written by an AI expert and a novelist. And so what he does is he takes 10 different stories that show how AI is going to affect our world 20 years from now. This book was published in 2021, so it's called AI 2041. The author said, AI could be the most transformative technology in the history of mankind. And we may not even see much of this sweeping change coming. That's because, and this is the key that I like, we often overestimate what technologies can do in 5 years, but underestimate what they'll be able to do in 20. And I think that's just really key. So I want to get more to the global insights part of my talk. There's such an emphasis on game developers on the West, but really there's a huge underemphasis on taking games to Asia, but that's half our market. And that's my specialty. That's what I'm going to talk a bit about here. I'm not the expert in this region, so I'm certainly not going to address it, but I will talk a little bit about Asia. And having lived in Japan, lived and worked in Japan for 8 years, been doing business all across Asia for the last 30, one of the questions that I get asked the most is, what's it like doing business in Asia? And I tell you, I hate this question. It's so generic. It's kind of asking like, can you explain to me what food is like? It's just impossible. It's 2,300 languages, it's innumerable dialects, it's 30% of the world's landmass, and it's a massive diversity of cultures. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell you 4 different insights which I view as the number one important things to be successful in those regions. And then I'm going to tie those into specific deals that I've done. Now, for this conference, I've actually taken this from an hour-long presentation that I call anecdotes. And they're really really fun stories that I have in my business experience over the last 30 years. Stories like when I was on the media swinging from a chandelier at a hotel in Tokyo. So fun stories like that. I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to talk about some specific deals that I've done since this is the deal-making conference. So the first insight I want to talk to you about is Japan and this term called honne. And I have never seen any better description of honne than in the movie Emperor in 2012, starring Matthew Fox and Tommy Lee Jones. Has anybody ever seen this movie? It's a fantastic movie. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. They did a fantastic job with it. They're essentially doing an investigation as to whether or not to try war criminal for World War II. I won't give the spoiler alert, but it's a phenomenal movie. And this explains it really well.
There are two Japanese words you should know. Tatemae, the way things appear. Honne, the way they really are. When you look at Japan, you see the most modern and westernized of Asian countries. But that is a tatemae, the surface.
And the honne?
It is the true heartbeat of my country, which is more than 2,000 years old. It has nothing to do with the West. Japan runs on the ancient warrior code of loyalty and obedience.
Fantastic description of honne versus tatemae. And, you know, I have been in countless meetings with other Westerners in Japan, and we have this meeting, and my Western colleagues go out of the meeting thinking, that was awesome, that was so great. And I shake my head and like, no, it wasn't. It's being successful in Japan requires the ability to differentiate between tatemae and honne. And my first trip to Japan was 1985. And I think over those many years, I'm pretty accurate in that distinction, and that's super, super important. So here, I'm going to talk about the first deal, since this is the deal-making conference. This was with a company in Japan. We were doing a site license for a large hardware maker. I can't tell you who it is, sorry. But they insisted that they would need X number of licenses for their site-wide. And we knew just by analytics data that we had seen by people within that company that they were going to need so much more. And so what we agreed on, we were flexible in this. We agreed in September 2011, 2012 perhaps, on a $10 million site license deal in September. That following December, they realized you were right, and it then became an $18 million deal. And so the key here is to be flexible. And often in any sort of deal, you need to learn to crawl first, walk, then run. And so that's the first deal that I'll talk about. Now, I'll talk a little bit about China. And I don't speak Chinese, so I'm sure I would butcher this word, but it's a really, really important word all across China. I've spent a lot of time in China, and there are these aiguo, I'm probably butchering it, but it's all over the country, and it's hugely important. And so in your business dealings in China, if you can tap into that, it greatly helps your success. And so here, I want to talk about the second deal. This was actually a real estate deal that I did with the Putuo government of Shanghai. Putuo is a subsection of Shanghai, kind of like in New York City, they've got the 5 boroughs. Putuo is one of Shanghai's regions. This was a deal I did at Unity. I can tell you who it was. But we did a deal with the municipal government where they gave us a building. Completely rent-free, we could use it. We had 2 of the 6 floors in this building. The other 4 housed an incubator, and the commitment that we gave to them was that we had to help those incubatees, and it was a fantastic deal. So be strategic. Now I want to talk about insights into Korea. Most Asians have a perception of being calm and reserved, right? And while that's mostly true, Korea is crazy. I have never seen a more passionate people than Koreans, mostly for good. And so I won't go into those stories, but instead, I'll talk to you about a deal that I did in Korea. This one, I can't mention the name either, but we did a deal with a huge multinational company. It was a massive deal, close to $50 million in this deal. We did the deal with corporate in Seoul, and then after the deal was done, they realized they didn't have budget for it, and they'd already signed it. So instead of getting in a really ugly legal, protracted, argument, our team suggested to them, well, you're a multinational. Are there other entities within your corporate governance that could do it? And so we redid the deal actually with one of their overseas subsidiaries in Brazil because they were able to find budget for it. So sometimes you just need to be really creative in the deal structures that you do. In Southeast Asia, what I believe the number one key to success, and again, this is super general, but what I believe the number one key to success there is respect. I find that if you show up, show interest, show respect, and genuine love and admiration for those cultures, it takes you a very, very long way. And so this brings me to my deal number 4 that I want to talk about, which was an interesting deal. This was while I was at Unity. We can talk about it. The Polytechnic system in Singapore, which houses 6 campuses, they actually bought Unity licenses and support in exchange for us helping them design their game design curriculum. And so it was a fantastic deal. I will say that in almost all of Asia, working with governments is super key. And I've always emphasized in doing business in Asia to make sure that I really know the government people that I need to know there, which in China makes things interesting sometimes. So now I want to talk about an insight that I think is applicable in all of Asia, and it's the signing ceremony. Any of you familiar with what a signing ceremony is? Right? It's massively important, right, Antonio? I have done hundreds of these signing ceremonies. And quite frankly, the vast majority of them, I'm sitting there with my counterpoint signing a blank piece of paper for the media to take pictures of. And it's the weirdest thing, but it is highly effective. And in fact, in December of 2012, I get a call from my Korea country manager. And he says, John, we've done this deal with KOCA, which is the Korea Creative Contents Agency, and we have to do a signing ceremony, and we have to do it before the end of the year. And this was like December 14th, and I'm like, Will, I'm done with travel for the year. I don't want to go back. He's like, John, you've got to be here. This is hugely important. And so I did, and this ended up being one of 3 day trips that I have done over the course of my career from the Americas to Asia. Done it in a day. So I was on the ground in for less than 10 hours. But I went there, we signed this deal, and the very next month we got a $300,000 order from KOCA. And so doing these signing ceremonies is super important. Here's an example of one just recently. That VTC did. VTC is sort of Vietnam's Google equivalent. There was a very famous signing ceremony between Trump and Kim, which I just laughed at because I knew it was ceremonial and largely useless. But these things are really, really key to success in Southeast Asia. So I want to recap. And so trends that we're talking about: the post-pandemic hangover, lots of money, consolidation, Web3 games, cloud games. Even though Stadia had a craptacular failure, it still is the future. And then artificial intelligence. Some of these keys to success that I talked about was understanding real intention in Japan, feeding into the patriotic passion of the Chinese, being very passionate with the Koreans. I don't necessarily advise you to yell in a contract negotiation in Korea unless you're really good at reading that room. But I've done it to great effect. And then Southeast Asia, respect. You know, Southeast Asia, Singapore in particular, has a Rodney Dangerfield complex. If you're familiar with that late American comedian, he always had this spick that he did on, I don't get no respect. And that's largely what Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia had. And then across all of Asia is the signing ceremony. Super, super important. And so these deals that I talked about, I want to emphasize 4 things in your deal negotiations and in the deals that you structure. Be flexible, be strategic, be creative, and be supportive. And so I want to add with a final thought. I promised I would get to a bold prediction. But first of all, we'll start with this quote by Arthur C. Clarke, one of my favorite science fiction authors. Loved the book Rama. Movie wasn't all that great. But what he said is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I love the quote. But here's my prediction. I'm not a creative guy. I'm a business guy. I tend to be creative when I do business dealings, but I'm not a creative guy. And my bold prediction is that within 10 years, AI that we're starting to see today is going to allow someone like me to create the next billion-dollar games franchise. And so that is my prediction. So that's all I have. We actually do have some time for Q&A if we want to do that. Here's my contact information. I assume by December 31st, I will get an email address for i3d.net. I do onboarding in Rotterdam the week of December 5th. I'm super excited. I believe that i3d.net is really kind of that next big games platform that I can build an empire around in Asia and in the Americas. So if you have any questions, you can certainly contact me here, and then we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Any questions?
First of all, John, thank you very much. And first question.
Thanks. Thanks for your time, John. Really great talk. Quite an easy question, I hope. Do you have any tips for companies not based in Asia who actually want to break into that market? Which outreach ways do you find that Asian companies react best to? And I'm sure it's different per region. Right. Obviously, the techniques we use in the Western Europe don't quite hit as well. So any tips on that would be great.
No, it's a great question. And I'm reminded of, you've probably heard of the GamesBeat Summit that Dean Takahashi runs and whatnot. I was on a panel at GamesBeat Summit in San Francisco a number of years ago, and I was on a panel on doing business in Asia. And there was a native Chinese guy, there was a native Korean guy, there was a native Japanese guy, and me. And the question came up, as Westerners, do I even bother? Can I be successful in Asia? And so I kind of chuckled and I said, hey, I'm not Asian. Mark Rain was sitting in the back of the room of Epic Games fame. He was in the back room. I didn't know he was there, but he stood up and he said, lies! So one of the biggest things that I could recommend is really learning and loving those cultures and approaching it from that perspective. And that's kind of a 10,000 meter view answer to your question. Getting more down closer to the trees, I have always found it most effective to work through a local partner. And so to set up distributor relationships, sometimes a consultant on the ground, but you want to appear, in order to be successful as a Western company, you want to appear to be local. And so your customers have that look and feel. I have done countless distributor agreements, things along those lines, but fantastic question. Anything else?
We're done with questions? You can catch John, obviously, here at the conference. You can ask him things in private. And John, this was awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.